So what came out of your discussion? Like, who wants to be the spokesperson this time? Your turn.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so for the one-line self-description,
Yeah.
based on the accomplishments, we have identified that to convert the accomplishment table, it's going to say a mechanical engineer specializing in design and cost reduction.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Well, yeah.
Cost reductions of the product development, so something like that.
So,
It's
so
most of that.
conceptually, what are you doing? Fundamentally, you're extracting the pattern.
Yes. So we have seen design development there, design improvement there,
Yes.
cost reduction there, optimization of the products there. So we try to combine it in one line self-description.
That's it.
But at the same time, we have to make sure that the position and the specialization is still there on that one line self-description.
That's right. So that's the way I look at it. Look, the one-line self-description is really meant to, people will know you're the right kind of person or you're not. It becomes a really, really straightforward evaluation at that point. And so, assuming that your resume gets read by a human being as opposed to software, okay, what people will look at is the first half of the first page.
Yes.
And in that first half of the first page, is there enough information to entice me to read the rest? That is, generally speaking, the mindset of people. So that's
really the one-line self-description has to come from the job posting itself.
well, it should. Well, on one hand, obviously the one-line self-description should be related to that job, but you should only apply to jobs where the one-line self-description that you've come up with independently of jobs match the requirements of the job. Because if you're changing your one-line self-description to match other jobs, that is not necessarily the one then that's probably going to create more problems than it solves.
Yeah.
Okay? Because now you're again trying to go back to being broad, or at least broadening the range of specializations. And I really don't encourage people to do that. Now, I know when you're desperate, it's easy to say, well, be focused. And it's hard for people at that point to do that.
But
yeah, that thing I was looking for. Go ahead.
in the context of what we're talking about here, especially where it's potentially a technical field or something like that, it can even help sort of draw out some of these aspects that as a counselor we might not be able to pick up on, but
Yes.
as a technical expert, you can start to draw some correspondence there.
I see what you mean. Yes, absolutely. So in other words, in your one-line self-description, I would say even more so in the profile, you will use the same words as what's being used in the job posting. Yes, absolutely. Because that is a critical element. So I think I understand where you're coming from. That absolutely. Because if you use different words to describe the same thing, what will happen? It won't work. People will not look at it as, quite often people will reject the resume. For two reasons. One, it may be done by software. Software really needs, you have to use exactly the same word that they're using, because otherwise the software will reject it. Sometimes it's not software, it's actually a human being who does this first screening, but that person is in HR.
Yeah.
They do not know that the word you used and the word the job posting was using mean the same thing. And so as a result, no, they don't see the word they're looking for, gone. So yes, absolutely. You definitely want to make sure that the words you use reflect the language that is used in the job posting. And ideally, if you can find people from that company or articles that were written by people from that company, then you can find what words they use internally. Is everybody with me on this? Yes. So yes, absolutely. That part is really critical. In the one-line self-description, it's less likely to show up, But in the profile, that will definitely happen very often. Like you want to make sure you use the right words. Well, right words. The words they use. Because to them, that will be the right word. Yeah.
So do we have to customize, like, for examples, the company might be putting an advertisement that they are looking certain kind of qualities. So you have also that skill, but you might be writing it in your resume in different ways. So do you have to customize it and then make it the same way as the way they put it?
Pretty much, yes. Particularly when it comes to technical things. If they use a particular acronym or a particular word to describe something, I can't think of any word right now. But let me give you one example, because one is, which I've seen a lot, is if you say you design, that will mean you are an engineer.
Yeah.
If you say you draft, people will interpret that as technician. So the choice of words in English is really critical, which makes it really challenging for people who operate in English as a second language, because obviously then which words means what. Yeah. But that is, yes, the choice of words will be really important. Now, I cannot think of an example of a word. Well, if you think of cars, let me use that example, because the words that people use to describe parts of the car are different in the UK and in North America. So, for example, the trunk is called the hood in the UK, if I remember correctly. Yeah, hood. And bonnet is the
bonnet is the hood, trunk is the boot.
Yes, boot. That's it. What we call the trunk is the boot in a car. Like, if you say you improve the design of a boot, people will wonder, like, what are you talking about? So, yes, using the words that people use will be really important. Yes. So now, let's talk about, so from a technical perspective, absolutely. You use exactly the words they use. From a soft skill perspective, then there's a bit more leeway there. So when it comes to soft skills, one of the pieces of advice I give to people is don't try to claim a soft skill on your resume unless you can point to 3 different situations that will, in your experience, that will demonstrate you have that soft skill. I say 3 because I find Canadians tend to count 1, 2, and many. Meaning if you've done it 3 times, you can do it many times. Okay? So the idea is, so for example, I have never seen a resume that says I'm a poor team player. Right? Everybody's a great team player on their resume. But that means nothing on paper unless you can point to situations things in your resume, like specific statements in your resume that support that particular bullet point. So what would be the kind of statements that, in people's experience or extracurricular activity or whatever, that would support, for example, a statement like, I'm a good team player? Well, I was part of a team that won an award. I was the captain of the soccer team. I was, part of a team that competed in high school for something. If you have 3 like that, then you can say, yes, I'm a good team player. And people will see that, yeah, you're not making it up. You can back it up with real life examples. If you say you have leadership, well, same thing. Give me examples. If you say you're a good communicator, give me examples. Because all these statements are empty without some form of supportive evidence. Make sense to everybody? Okay. So in that respect, so this is kind of, there's many different formats of resumes, right? And if there was one format that really worked way better than the others, everybody would know what it is.
I'd be rich.
Yeah, that's right. So, generally speaking, For immigrants, it's not, may not be true for everybody, but this is what I recommend is, so I try to use the semi-functional, as you can see, this is like the kind of what Evgeny is using, okay? So, and I look at the resume where we said, like, if you have a generalist resume, it ends up with looking like a house that has extensions in all directions. I want to create a resume that looks like a pyramid. So you have that one-line description. You have that profile that supports that one-line description. You have the experience that supports that profile. You have the education that supports the experience, and you may have the rest, extracurricular, whatever. And my idea is, whatever you put in that description, you need to be able to point to 3 locations that support that statement. Same thing in your profile. You're going to say things. You want to be able to say, like team, great team player, 3 statements that support that one. Okay? So I look at it as a cascade in a pyramid. Like, just like a pyramid, you need a solid foundation, which is usually education, then experience, then profile, then the top. But people will read it the opposite way. They'll start from the top and going down. Make sense to everyone? And so in particular, all these descriptions that people write on their accomplishment tables, that's what you turn into accomplishment statements. So you're going to start with an active word. Usually accomplishment statements tend to be, I achieved this by doing that. Yep. And so you show the result. And again, we start with the result, and then you explain how you got it. And yes?
Just to point out too, before you go.
Please.
The reason also that we need to put the languages that was used in the job description is because of the ATS, the applicant tracking system.
Yes.
Some of the in the applicant tracking system, some of the words, they have keywords that they're looking for in the resume. So it's one of the things that we have to consider when you're really writing the resume, that we put those keywords from the job description as well.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah. So, to me, that's kind of the mindset. So that accomplishment table becomes the raw material for the resume. And you can see how it can be used. So the one-line self-description is the pattern. It's the thing that comes over and over again. Profile will be, and in the profile, again, there will be words that are taken from either from the job postings or from they need to be specific to the area. I mean, if I take the example of Evgeny's resume, there were several words that I would never have thought of using because I don't use them, and it's not really related to my field as an engineer, but it's common in his. For example, electromagnetic interference. Okay. As a chemical engineer, I don't have to deal with that. BOM stands for Bill of Material. GD&T stands for Geometric Dimensioning and Tolerance. I had never heard those words, those acronyms until, and the way we found them is from job description. Okay. DTC is designed to cost. Again, I mean, those are things, I had no idea what these are not words I would use as a chemical engineer. But in Evgeny's area, yes, they're critical. Yeah. And you can see the kind of the pattern, right, in that resume. So in other words, that kind of cascading effect. Yeah. Well, there's one, so mechanical engineer supported by, you're working on manufacturing cost, you have experience in design, and you're using software that is specific to your field. That's another one. That is one of the ways that, because there are plenty of software, like everybody knows Microsoft Office. Yes. So that saying that you're good at that doesn't mean much to people. But if you mention a piece of software that is specific to your field, then it's obvious you're working in that field. because otherwise you wouldn't even know about it. SolidWorks is a good example. As a chemical engineer, we don't use SolidWorks. So I would not even think of, I don't even know what it is. He does, because he has worked in this field. Another way you can show, because all this is showing to people you've done the job. Another way of doing it, you can see it, and you can see it here. See, extensive experience in optimizing enclosure and product designs to minimize manufacturing cost while maximizing serviceability, weatherability, and product life. What does that mean? What I'm trying to communicate with this line is I understand the inherent trade-offs of the job. In every job, there are trade-offs. If you do more of one thing, you will have to do less of another. As a counselor, if you take on more clients, you will spend less time with each. And so on and so forth. And communicating to people that you understand these trade-offs and you're good at managing them is, in my experience, again, a really good way to show that you know the job. It's also true during interviews, for example. You ask people questions that are related to things that only people who have done the job would know. Then it's very obvious you've done the job and you know the job well. Has any of you experienced that? Like, can you think of a specific example? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a client. He said he's a software developer. So what happened is he wants to apply for a software developer for like an Android developer.
Okay.
So he applied for a gaming company for Android developer, testing games for Android. So and he said too in his resume and his accomplishment and all of this that he has been able to build a game, game development as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so past the first interview, second interview, he has to go to the company, and then he was given a gaming PC,
Yeah.
and then he said, create a game. These are the specifications. You have been given an hour. He cannot do it. He cannot do it.
He cannot do it?
He
Oh,
cannot
man.
do it. And then they said, an hour for all the accomplishments that you have put in your resume is too long. It will be too long if you really have done this.
Done what you've done. Okay.
So done what you've done.
Okay.
So that's one thing that I keep on telling to those who are applying for IT developer programmers. If you have not done it, really done it. Yes, you may have known all this language, lingos, because you have studied it, you have all of that. But when it comes to positions, to interviews, they will know if you're faking it.
Yes. That's a good example. So I'll give you an example of a successful situation, kind of like I remember. So when I was working for Xerox, I was doing research in polymers. Polymers is another word for plastic. Well, it's a different version, but plastic is a subset of polymers, but it's the polymer that most people are familiar with. And when the way you do it is you kind of mix ingredients, you heat it, you stir it, and then it cooks, kind of thing. That's the simplest description. And it becomes like more and more viscous as the reaction progresses. And when it's done, it's a goo. Okay? And when you cool it down, it becomes really messy. It's very hard to get out. So when you want to clean the reactor, it's, and I hope you excuse my word, a bitch. Okay, because the thing is it's like you have glue that is set. Again, it's really hard to so I always remember, remember I told you, I used to get these technicians, people who would come to work for me as technicians from this not-for-profit organization. So they sent me one person, and this lady is from Romania. She's a chemical engineer. And so I interview her, everything's fine. And then we go to the lab, and I show her the equipment. And the first question she asked me is, how do you clean the reactor? I know she's done the job. Because this is the one thing that is so painful. If you haven't done it, you wouldn't think of asking that question. But if you've done it, yes, that's the first thing you would think of. Okay? So you see the idea. Okay? By pointing out elements that are really job specific, again, you are clearly demonstrating you have done the job. You are a specialist. Make sense to everybody? So I find this really helps, again, in job interviews. Like you're using the lingos, you're really demonstrating you know what you're doing. So when it comes to cover letters, as a counselor, I have recommended to many of my clients to use, so you may have heard, I've seen it called T-style. T's because like that. Why do I recommend that approach? Because you cannot hide a gap between your experience and the requirements of the job that way. I mean, you list all the requirements of the position, you list your qualifications side by side. If there's a gap, it's immediately obvious. I have used it more as a tool to deter people from applying for jobs they were not qualified. Because how useful the cover letter is something that's very debatable. Some people say they put a lot of emphasis on it. Others say they don't even read it. So you never know. You still have to create one, that's for sure. Yeah. But what I find really helpful with this is, as a counselor, it helps me identify whether the person is applying for a job for which they're qualified or not. If they're not qualified, it's very obvious from that format. Whereas you can kind of hide it a bit more the other way around.
Cut me off if you're going to cover this, but just from a career advisor perspective, the T format cover letter is really, really useful because you don't know that the HR person reading the cover letter is themselves an engineer. So this is taking the job requirements and very quickly like check boxing, I have this requirement, this requirement, this requirement. They'll then take the resume and hand it off to the hiring decision maker, who usually probably is an engineer or an accountant or whomever.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is actually the only format of cover letter we use. We use not quite T. You can also bold the job requirements in bullets, but it's essentially the same
concept.
Yeah.
So this is when you've been on the receiving end, this is an important point. Okay, like that makes it very easy. Same thing with like having a part of your resume that is chronological. Most people on the recruiting side really want that because it makes it so much easier to read the resume. Otherwise, trying to figure out what did you do, where, when is like, and if you make it harder, what happens?
They pass. They go
Exactly.
To the next
They'll go to the next one. You'll be rejected fundamentally, or you'll be in the let's see if I can find anybody easier or better in category. Yeah. All right. Now there's one. Yes, please. Before we go to the next one, go ahead. Yes.
Just a question.
Go right ahead.
How often is required a cover letter?
It depends on organizations. I mean, really what I've found is when I talk to employers, like some organizations will say the cover letter is one of the ways they will try to evaluate soft skills.
Yep.
And so at that point, the cover letter becomes really important. Other organizations say we give people the resumes and only the resumes when they do the screening. So they don't get the cover letters at all. So you cannot tell ahead of time unless you know somebody inside the organization who can tell you how important the cover letter is. If you don't have any information about what's going on inside, then you have to assume it's important. Because otherwise, if it's important and you don't put it in, or you put very little effort, then you might be rejected. If you put a lot of effort and it's not important, it's still effort that will be useful for your interview preparation anyway. So it's not fully lost. Yes, let me give you that thingy.
Sorry, you're kind of talking about jam when you're on resume and cover letter. So I can't see an employer rejecting a applicant for submitting a cover letter. If they don't want it, they're just going to bypass it and go right to the resume. Point is, every applicant at some point will need a cover letter. For some hiring managers, it's critically important. For others, if they don't care, they'll just go to the resume. So either way, the clients who come to me and say, oh, I don't need a cover letter, I've heard this. I'm like, you don't know. You don't know who's assessing your resume and how. So eventually you will need one, would be my response.
Yes. Yes, go ahead. Oh, so,
yeah,
oh sorry. Okay.
Okay. For me, cover letter is very important, especially if it's written this T style.
Yeah.
The reason for that is if one professional position is up, you got 200
Yes.
resumes right
Oh,
there.
yeah.
In order for the HR or the recruiter to screen, they will always look at their cover letter first. And right there and there, if it's in T style, they will see right away if the job requirement and the qualifications match.
Yes.
And then they put aside that. Especially if it's not the robot that's doing it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So
If it's a
the
robot,
cover
then
letter
it's
is
different.
really, really, really important for HR and recruiter.
Yeah.
I find that that out of the 200 that had passed, they will skim those who have written cover letter. That means they have put more effort and time,
yes.
and they put it aside.
Yeah.
Than those that has only passed resumes.
Okay. That's a good point. Okay. Yes?
I'll also mention, so I talked to a few people from EY the past few weeks, and they said, especially when we're working with students, that the cover letter is a prime example, almost of an assessment of what type of business writing could you do for us.
Yes.
So taking that opportunity, showing what you got in that writing form is a great way to show
Very
why
true.
you might be an applicant
true.
for that, right?
Very, very true.